वाली खाना काबा ये पुकारा, मिलके लगाओ सभी हैदरी नारा।
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The 14th proof of invalidity of the ritual of Taraweeh proceeds from this account of Zayd ibn Thabit, that the Sahaba who gathered outside the house of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, as they were demanding that Taraweeh should be upheld and Taraweeh should be performed, threw rocks at the house of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Throwing rocks at the door of any person is an act of rudeness and a display of disrespect and an insult. And in reference to the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and retaining in mind the lofty position the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam holds, and the sacred position the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam enjoys, and the immense respect and veneration the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam deserves, throwing rocks at the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam's residence is an act that's repugnant upon conscience, upon reason, and is vulgar to any Muslim's faith and any Muslim's conscience. A plethora of fatwa and decrees from the scholars of all sects is prevalent that any person who commits an act that is considered offensive with respect to the sanctity of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and which violates the respect of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, such a person is called outside the bounds of Islam, called godless, faithless, infidel, and such a person is called an apostate, a murtad, and also such a person is condemned to capital punishment. The people outside the house of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam threw rocks at the house of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and this is obviously an act of disrespect. Why the noble Quran asks the Muslims not to even talk to the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the manner they would talk to each other, and do not address him in the manner that they would address each other. How could the gang of Sahaba throw rocks at the house of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam while claiming to be Muslims and be mu'min and be faithful? Obviously, this is a violation of the very articles of Iman and a grotesque display of utter rudeness and a repellent vulgarity, and this cannot be denied. The facts are in front of you. You saw the hadith of Bukhari. The Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is not only reluctant to be part of Taraweeh, he refuses to be part of Taraweeh. And he disperses them time and again and asks them to go to their homes. Perhaps the Umri congregation would say the throwing rocks at the door of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was not an act of disrespect. Then I demand the Umri congregation to answer me why the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came out with anger. And I ask you, if some group of men gather outside your house and they throw rocks at your house and they shout at you, wouldn't you consider that an act of insult and disrespect to you? And wouldn't you consider it more respectful that they should come and knock on the door and call you out, or wait for you if they're being more observant of your respect, to wait for you outside so you come out? And in any culture that I know of, whether it be the Arabs or the Persians or the Indo-Pakistanis or in the United States, throwing rocks at somebody's house is not a friendly act. It's an act of aggression, an act of rudeness and disrespect. Therefore, the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam comes out with anger. That is a clear indication of what they did was that they pestered the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, annoyed the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and also they disrespected the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. If the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was not angry for the Sahaba throwing rocks and raising their voices and shouting at him, why was he angry? Was he angry because they demanded Taraweeh? Then our point is proved. If the anger was because the Sahaba demanded Taraweeh, then Taraweeh itself is an act that causes the wrath of Allah and the wrath of the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And if the anger was not because the demand for Taraweeh, the anger of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was for the Sahaba's behavior, Sahaba throwing rocks and shouting, then again our point is proved. If they say that the anger of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was because the Sahaba did not know that performing Taraweeh would entail the Taraweeh becoming obligatory, that was the reason the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was angry. He was not angry because they demanded Taraweeh. He was not angry because they were raising their voices and shouting at him and throwing rocks at him or at his house. He was angry because the Sahaba did not know that performing Taraweeh would make Taraweeh obligatory. Then the answer is also clear. The Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam could not have been angry at people for something they did not know. If I do not know that performing Taraweeh, if Taraweeh is indeed an act of worship of the deity, an act of veneration, in an acceptable form of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I ask the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to lead me in prayers, and I do not know that there's a risk of this becoming obligatory, then the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam does not have a right to be angry at me. He should explain with love and compassion, not with anger, that listen, if we do so and so, if we perform Taraweeh more often, it would become obligatory, and then it would cause you discomfort, it would cause you inconvenience. However, we have proved already that Taraweeh could have never been subject to becoming compulsory, even if it were an action that was recommended by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the many reasons that I've explained in the previous lectures. Therefore, there was no chance Taraweeh could have become obligatory. Therefore, there's only two possibilities. The anger of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was for the behavior of the Sahaba, namely shouting and throwing rocks, or it was for the demand of Taraweeh. For either one proves our point. Now, how does the Sahaba's action constitutes infidelity, constitutes disbelief, constitutes being expelled from the bounds of Iman in Islam? In other words, it's kufr. How does that prove the invalidity of Taraweeh? That's obvious and very clear. As the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam refuses to be part of Taraweeh, the band of Sahaba who are insisting that Taraweeh should be upheld are such creatures who are, by consensus of all Muslims, their actions constitute grounds for their infidelity, for their disbelief, for their irtidad, and for their apostasy. Obviously, their demand versus the demand of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Their demand is Taraweeh should be performed. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam does not want to become part of Taraweeh. It's obvious which position is sacred, which position is to be followed, and which position would constitute basis for Islamic canonicity and for Islamic shara and Islamic laws. This was my proof number 14. Proof number 15. The actions of Sahaba, time and again, they're raising their voices, making noise outside the house of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, yelling his name sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and then throwing rocks at the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And in the previous nights, the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is solemnly performing his individual recommended prayers, and they disturb him by forming rows of congregational prayers behind him. All of these actions constitute annoyance of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Annoyance. If somebody comes outside your house and he raises his voice and starts yelling and shouting your name and throws rocks at you, or he does something because of which you cannot perform your salah. The Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam was performing his individual recommended prayer. Sahaba's action caused the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam to stay sitting down, to keep sitting down. And then the other nights he did not even come to the mosque in order to perform his nawafil. his recommended prayers. If any person does an action to you that causes you to stop your prayers, that causes you not to come to the mosque, it would be an action of immense annoyance and an immense inconvenience and an immense discomfort for you. This is exactly what Sahaba did to the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, to the greatest Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. They annoyed him, they disturbed him, they caused discomfort for the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. They pestered the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So what is the offense with that? If you annoy somebody, if you annoy the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, what is the problem with that? The problem with that is as follows. The Noble Quran, published by Saudi Arabia, King Fahd Complex for the printing of the Noble Quran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna alladhina Surah Al-Ahzab, verse number 57. إن الذين يؤذون الله ورسوله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم لعنهم الله في الدنيا والآخرة وأعد لهم عذابا مهينا. Verily those who annoy Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allah has cursed them in this world and in the hereafter. Cursed them in dunya, لعنهم الله في الدنيا والآخرة. They have been cursed, they have been condemned by Allah in this dunya, in this world, and in the hereafter, and has prepared for them a humiliating torment. Therefore, such people who annoy the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and pester the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and cause inconvenience and cause discomfort for the Nabi, for the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, they are the enemies of Allah. Allah has condemned them, Allah has damned them, Allah has cursed them in this world and in this life and in the hereafter, and awaits such a people a fire, a torment that's humiliating, that's embarrassing, and that causes them to be humiliated. So this is a great offense, and such people are cursed by Allah in this life and the hereafter. And surely and verily, any person who believes in the Noble Quran will acknowledge that these people would be tormented in the fire of hell forever. Therefore, the band of Sahaba, the band insistent on performing Taraweeh, is such a criminal, such an accursed, such a damned, or such a condemned group of people, enemies of God, condemned forever in the fire of hell. Therefore, if they were demanding a salah and the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is reluctant to perform that salah, rather he refuses to be part of that salah, it follows that that salah, that prayer, is the veneration of Satan, it's not the veneration of the deity. Such an act is an act of worship of Satan and devil, and not an act of veneration and prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This concludes my 15th argument for the invalidity of the ritual of Taraweeh, and inshallah more proofs and more arguments for the very same purpose will follow inshallah in the ensuing lectures. Please bear with us. Thank you. May Allah bless you all.